Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, philosophers, and welcome to video 5 of our series on philosophy of science through the lens of medicine. In our last episode, we looked at Karl Popper's Falsificationism, the idea that what makes a theory scientific isn't that it can be proven true, but that it can, in principle, be proven false. In other words, science is not a comfort blanket, it's more like a cage fight. If your theory can't take a punch, Popper doesn't want it on the card. Today, we're dragging Popper out of the seminar room and into the real world. We're going to look at medical conspiracy theories, and then we're going to turn our philosophical attention to something much closer to home here in South Africa. That is, African traditional medicine. For the conspiracy theories, I will do the heavy lifting. I'll give you the philosophical breakdown, point out the moving parts, and generally ruin everyone's favourite WhatsApp forwards. But for African traditional medicine, I'm not going to give you a neat answer. I'm going to leave the final verdict to you. So, philosophers, sharpen your concepts, check your assumptions, and let's dive in. Let's begin with one of the most persistent medical controversies of the last few decades, the claim that vaccines cause autism. Where did this idea come from? Well, in 1998, a British doctor named Andrew Wakefield published a paper in The Lancet, one of the world's greatest medical journals, claiming a possible link between the MMR vaccine and autism. The suggestion was that the vaccine somehow caused serious developmental changes in children. Now, through the lens of falsificationism, was Wakefield's claim scientific? Annoyingly, yes, at least at first. Now, remember that for Popper, scientific doesn't mean true, clever, morally respectable, or something your uncle says after 3 brandies at a braai. It means testable. Wakefield's claim was testable. It made a claim about the world. Children who receive the MMR vaccine should be more likely to develop autism, if his claim was true. And that claim was tested. Not once, not twice, not by someone with a clipboard and 3 toddlers in a waiting room. It was tested through large-scale epidemiological studies involving enormous numbers of children across different countries and populations, and the result was clear. No link between the MMR vaccine and autism. The paper was retracted, and Wakefield lost his medical license. Not because of bad science, but because of unethical practices. So, philosophically speaking, the claim was falsifiable, and then it was falsified. But here's the interesting bit. If the claim was falsified, why does the belief still survive on Facebook, YouTube, and the hallowed halls of WhatsApp University? This is where Popper becomes really useful. When a scientific claim is falsified, a scientist is supposed to abandon it, revise it, or at least take the problem seriously. But a conspiracy theorist often does something entirely different. They introduce what Popper calls ad hoc modifications. That means they add extra assumptions to protect the theory from being refuted. So, when the evidence doesn't support the vaccine-autism link, the conspiracy theorist says, but Big Pharma is hiding the real data, or the researchers have been paid off, or the studies are fake, or my personal favourite philosophical move, the absence of evidence is exactly what they want you to see. At that point, the theory has put on its bulletproof vest. This brings us to an important distinction: vaccine hesitancy versus vaccine denialism. Vaccine hesitancy can be a reasonable epistemological position. It is someone saying, I'm uncertain, please show me the evidence, explain the risks, explain the benefits, help me understand. That's not anti-science. That is, in many cases, exactly the kind of question-asking science should welcome. Vaccine denialism is very different. Denialism says, no amount of evidence could ever change my mind because any evidence against my view is itself a part of the conspiracy. That's not careful skepticism. That's skepticism wearing a tinfoil hat and refusing to come indoors. So, Popper helps us see something subtle. The original claim, vaccines cause autism, was falsifiable. It was scientific in form, even though it turned out to be false. But the conspiracy mindset surrounding it often becomes unfalsifiable. It protects itself from all possible refutation. So the question is not always, is this topic scientific or unscientific? Sometimes the better question is, which claims are testable and which claims have been protected from testing? This is the Popperian move. Now let's take a look at another example, chemtrails. You've probably seen the claim online. A plane flies overhead, leaves a white trail in the sky, and someone says, "That's not a normal condensation trail, that is the government spraying chemtrails on us." The origins of this conspiracy are often linked to fears about military research, weather modification, and secret government programs. In 1996, a US Air Force paper discussing weather modification helped fuel some of these suspicions. Suddenly, ordinary contrails, condensation trails formed by high-altitude aircraft, were reinterpreted as evidence of barium, aluminium, biological agents, or mind control chemicals, because apparently democracy was not stressful enough already. Now let's apply Popper. The central claim, that white trail contains harmful chemicals, is falsifiable. We can test it. We can take air samples, we can take soil samples, we can analyze the chemical composition, we can ask whether the claim survives contact with evidence. And when scientists have looked at these claims, the standard explanation is much less exciting. It's water vapor, ice crystals, and ordinary jet exhaust. Not quite as cinematic, I admit. Local man discovers cloud is not going to make a gripping Netflix documentary. But what happens when tests don't support the chemtrail theory? Again, the ad hoc modifications arrive like backup dancers. Chemtrails evaporate before they reach the ground. The labs are in on it. The pilots don't know what they're spraying. The scientists are controlled by the government. New evidence has been hidden. And now the theory has changed. It started as something testable, that there are chemicals in the trails. But when the evidence goes against that, the theory is protected by extra assumptions that make it impossible to refute. So, do you see the pattern? The problem isn't always that the original claim is meaningless or obviously irrational. The problem is that the belief system becomes structured in a way that no possible evidence could count against it. That's when Popper gets suspicious. A falsifiable claim can become part of an unfalsifiable worldview. And once that happens, we're no longer doing science, we're doing something else. Perhaps politics, perhaps identity, perhaps fear management, perhaps some very elaborate hobby for people with too much internet access. Now, let's bring this back to African soil and consider a much richer, more serious, and more complex case, African traditional medicine, or ATM. This is not the same kind of case as vaccine and autism or chemtrails. It would be lazy and frankly philosophically irresponsible to treat all non-Western medical traditions as if they were just conspiracy theories with better herbs. ATM is a broad and historically deep knowledge system. It includes empirical observation, cultural practice, spiritual interpretation, community authority, and inherited forms of expertise. In South Africa, many of you will be familiar with two broad kinds of traditional practitioner. First, there is the Inyanga, often described as the traditional herbalist. The Inyanga works with muti, medicinal plants, and may prescribe remedies such as umlonyani, Artemisa afra, for respiratory symptoms. Second, there is the Isangoma, often described as the diviner. The Isangoma is concerned not only with symptoms, but with the deeper spiritual or social meaning of illness. This may involve communication with the Imandlordi, the ancestors, sometimes through practices such as burning impepo, a sacred incense, to seek guidance about why a person is suffering. So ATM isn't one simple thing, it's a mixture of the empirical and the spiritual, the practical and the symbolic, the botanical and the ancestral. And this is where I stop giving you the answers and hand the chalk over to you. Think first about herbal medicine. Many herbal practices developed through long periods of observation, trial and error. People noticed that some plants helped with pain, fever, digestion, wounds, or breathing. They also noticed that other plants made people vomit, hallucinate, collapse, or meet the ancestors much sooner than planned. Over generations, communities retained some practices and rejected others. That looks, at least in part, like inductive reasoning. We observe patterns, we generalize from experience. We test the remedies in practice, we keep what seems to work and discard what seems dangerous or ineffective. Now, think back to our early episode on Francis Bacon. Is that not similar to Bacon's method of eliminative induction? Gather observations, remove false leads, build knowledge from repeated experience. On that side of ATM, there seems to be something recognizably empirical. But now think about the spiritual side. Suppose someone consults an Isangoma because they believe their illness is connected to displeased ancestors. Suppose a ritual is performed, but the person does not recover. What happens next? If the explanation is the ritual failed, therefore the theory was wrong, then we have something Popper might recognize as open to falsification. But if the explanation is always the ancestors were not properly appeased, or larger sacrifices needed, or someone has interfered spiritually, then we need to ask, is this an ad hoc save? Is the theory being protected against falsificationism? Or is this simply how explanation works within a different metaphysical and cultural framework? That's the hard question, because here's the philosophical danger. We don't want to be crude. We don't want to say Western biomedicine equals science, African tradition equals superstition. That would be bad philosophy, bad history, and almost certainly bad manners. But we also don't want to abandon critical thinking. We still need to ask which claims can be tested, which have been tested, which claims are empirical, which claims are spiritual, symbolic, or metaphysical, and which claims are being protected from all possible criticism. Popper gives us a tool, but he doesn't do all the thinking for us. So here's your task. I want you to take this question to the comment section and debate it properly, respectfully, and philosophically. Under Bacon's inductivism or Popper's falsificationism, is traditional African medicine wholly scientific, partially scientific, or pseudoscientific, and why? Be specific. Don't just say ATM is scientific or ATM is not scientific. Separate the herbal claims from the spiritual claims. Separate the testable from the untestable. Separate the evidence from the interpretation. And bear in mind that I've never consulted with the Isangoma, so where possible, please tell me your experiences and distinguish between the scientific and the unscientific versions of those. Here's the real philosophical kicker. Suppose you decide that some spiritual elements of traditional African medicine are not scientific. Does that mean they're false? Think back to our earlier discussions of the demarcation problem. The fact that a belief is not scientific doesn't automatically show that it's false, right? Moral claims are not scientific in the same way that chemistry is scientific. But that doesn't mean morality is nonsense. Religious beliefs may not be falsifiable in Popper's sense, but that doesn't settle whether they're true or meaningful. So the question isn't simply, is African traditional medicine science? The deeper question is, what follows from calling something science, non-science, or pseudoscience? That's where the philosophy begins. So, philosophers, get into the comments, be rigorous, be respectful, don't just shout science or colonialism and run away. Please try and make an argument. You've been doing this, hopefully, for a couple of years, so put it into practice. Thanks everyone for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.